Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Council meeting the first of 2022, being Wednesday the 9th of February 2022. And could I please ask Councillor Tukapua to start our meeting with Karakia? Thank you.
Me noi tātou. E tō mātou matu I te rangi, kia tapu tō ingoa, kia tai mai taurunga tiratanga, kia me te atau e pai ai ki runga ki te whenua, kia rite anō ki tō te rangi, ho mai kia mātou ai nei he taramu mātou mō tēnei rā. Murua o mātou hara, me mātou hoki e muru nei I o te hunga e harana kia mātou. Aua hoki mātou e kauea kia whakawaia, engari whakaorangia mātou I te kino, nau hoki te rangatiratanga, te kaha me te kroria ake āmine.
Amen. Kia ora, thank you. So, special welcome first of all to our interim Chief Executive. Nice to have you here. There was no nameplate, obviously, for probably only being here that short amount of time, but it is a special welcome to David and having been here over a week now. Welcome councillors, staff and David Roach, Chair of the Foxton Community Board. Just noting also that we have no apologies and Councillor Ketu is zooming in from his residence. So public participation, we have one item of public participation which is regarding item 8.4 and we will read that submission when the item comes up on the agenda. Any late items? Any declarations of interest? None. Confirmation of minutes. So we have the meeting minutes of Council the 16th of December, the meeting minutes of the extraordinary meeting of Council the 20th of December, and the meeting minutes in committee extraordinary meeting of Council the 20th of December 2021. I'll move that these be true and correct. Could I just have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Allen. All those in favour? Thank you. Any announcements? Councillor Tukapua.
Yeah, just a short one. This is potentially my last meeting in person for the term, based on the recommendation, the last item on the agenda. So I would like to request, please, if that is the case, if that's what passes, could I address the public at the end before the live stream goes off? You can say no, but I'm just asking.
Take that under consideration when we reach the item and our decision is made. Proceedings of committees. Mr. Roach, would you like to give us the update from the Foxton Community Board? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, at the start of the year and first meeting we changed from our normal board meeting to a workshop. I thought it was on the advice from our calling manager that we look at a priority list and what we want to do and achieve through the year. So holding reserve was our number one priority. We're still waiting for the officers and an update. That is really where our focus is at this stage. Palms North Wastewater, we had a great presentation. Very enlightening on what they are doing, maybe reassuring you a little bit. The board have decided that they will continue with their existing submission and wait for the resource consent application, and then we've got the opportunity to either improve or change or make an adjustment to our submission at that stage. Our submission, of course, and everyone's read it, is we believe in 100% to land, and if not, if the river is used, our standards that we want to see potable water in the river, nothing less. So that's the stand of the community board. The Lynn Land Pool, well, we put a submission in. We went along with option number 2. Felt that the council should really reconsider and look at the other options that are available. Give yourself a bit of time frame. That was the logic behind that submission. There was quite a bit of flooding in Foxton Beach over the December heavy rainfall. And I raised it at the workshop. Mr. Brannigan is going to arrange a meeting with the infrastructure manager, and we're going to meet down there. And I think there's a simple solution, but we need to meet on site with officers and see what the solution can be. Foxton Beach freehold account has been in a drafted policy out. It's going on for some time, so it was brought up at the meeting that we need to get this draft policy to the members of the public at the beach and then make it formal. So staff are going to look at that, how we can bring a meeting forward, and then we can make a decision at the next board meeting. Now, Save the River Trust had a workshop yesterday, and along with the consultants, and continuous scope and workshop of the loop opening is still paramount, and that also was reiterated by Mr. Clapperton. Let's keep it going and keep on that subject, on that job. So we want to carry on with that. Good Earth Matters were part of the thing. And the other thing, congratulate the staff on the motorhome park at Foxton. We got been a joint venture between the staff, the racing club, and the Motorhome Association. So that's another bonus to our tourist venture in Foxton. So it's great. And you had a good article in the paper, Mr. Mayor, about it. That was, yeah, I think it was great. So look forward to them and another 100 buses a week parking up in Foxton and spending some money, hopefully. But that's all, and I'm prepared to answer any questions if anyone's got any.
Any questions for Chair David?
Just a quick comment
Councillor
around
Casons.
thank you, around the motorhome park. So I know it's only been open a short time, but the rave reviews, all the positiveness coming from that's been really great. We've been hearing it, well, I've been hearing it all around town. So well done, it's pretty exciting.
Looked at different sites, but yeah, I think they've picked a good site now. Yeah, I'm going to get some electric scooters and I'll be able to make a bob, totally letting them all get into town with them. Absolutely.
Please warn us when you're on the road. Thank you. Thank you, David. And as a couple of councillors from your area, neck of the woods, continually remind us that Foxton is the centre of the universe. We know that this is just adding to its attraction. So, yeah, congratulations to all concerned in terms of getting that across the line. I think it'll be a great addition for the community and in particular Foxton. Thank you. So moving to 8.1, which is the mayoral report on page 7. Just could I move receipt of that report, 2.1, 2.2. Councillor and Councillor Isaacs, all those in favour? Thank you. Just to note my engagements over the December-January period, and also to thank councillors for their reports in terms of the community group liaisons. I thought it was important that the community understand the amount of work that councillors do commit to in their roles, and also to update them on the various things that they do. It's not just the monthly meetings that we participate in, so yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Councillor Brand.
Yeah, my apologies for not this one slipping off the radar, Your Worship. Just wondering whether we can we give the same opportunity, perhaps, at your next mayoral report to those of us that missed the opportunity.
Certainly. I mean, that's the whole purpose of a report like this, is to enable us all to report back to our communities in terms of what we do. So yes, welcome that. Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I just wonder if I could add a couple of comments to my report on Save Our River Trust. That's on page 12. And just to pick up on the community board report, which referenced the meeting yesterday, which I was able to attend, and I just want to underline that it was a very important step, in my view, on the journey to realising the vision of a good flow in the loop and also the ability to navigate the loop, those two shared goals. There were over 20 participants in the workshop yesterday. It went from 11 o'clock till 3 o'clock. And as the community board report referenced, it was about consenting and scoping exercise to start to actually realise that vision. It was run by Good Earth Matters. The two key speakers were specialists in resource consenting and river hydrology, respectively. The day was spent developing very clear objectives around the benefits of reopening the loop. So it was trying to take it from that high level, it's a good idea, to what actually will it mean to Foxton and the district? How will it be measured in terms of its success in economic, social, environmental and cultural terms? And some really good ideas came out of that, which have given good guidance to Good Earth Matters, who can now progress it to the next stage. So they'll report back to SORT on the options and the costings. There'll be a timeline and there'll be accountabilities around that. And the day concluded with a consensus that there is an understandable sense of impatience. After all, SORT has been in existence since 2004. They've been fighting that battle. But despite the impatience, SORT recognised that this is actually a legacy project and it must be done once and done right. As I said in my written report, this council has shown its commitment to SORT in very tangible ways, and I urge us to continue to do so.
Thank you. Councillor Kidder, did you have something to add?
Yes, Mayor Bernie, thank you. Just wanted to say that what a fantastic way of us being able to share in your report and how that's really grateful on our end as one of our, as part for our community. Just wanted to just say that I hope we're able to do this, through the reporting through you again and for the future. Yeah, just wanted to make a note around some of the other things in when I attend their progressive. There are other community groups that actually report back to the progressive, and not all of those were accounted for or even talked about in my report. But it's a work in process, and well done there, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Yes,
It wasn't in my report. Well, it actually was, but it wasn't in the printed version. So am I able to do a quick update on Title Vibes? Or I can put it in the next one. That's fine.
It would be appropriate, I think, in the next one, definitely.
That's fine.
Yeah. Thank you. Look, it's not to justify your existence in terms of what you do. It is intended so that the community are aware of the groups that you are appointed to as councillors and some of those significant groups that we actually contribute funding to, and just basically reporting back on what they achieved and your commitment to those groups. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so now moving to 8.2, the Three Waters reform and our options for advocacy. So the purpose of this paper is to agree a position on the Three Waters reform and identify the appropriate mechanism for advocacy of Council's position. Could I just move 2.1 and 2.2 that we receive the report? Councillor Jennings, seconded Councillor Kay Simmons. All those in favour? Thank you. So you will have been able to read this report, and there has been a lot that has happened in the Three Waters space over the last few months, and it was timely that we actually make a decision as to where we sit on this. There is a lot happening in the space, again through the Three Waters Working Group and the transition group as well. And I'd just like the interim chief executive, if you wouldn't mind just bringing us up to date with some of those happenings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's a number of things which are underway. The project is gathering momentum, so just to mention each of those briefly to you. The first is that the National Transition Unit has been established, and one of its first activities has been to put out an information request to all of the councils regarding their current staffing, contract arrangements and so on in relation to the Three Waters businesses. So that's sitting with us at the moment, and one we will start to work with the National Transition Unit on. They are also undertaking procurement of external advisors to provide advice to them and by extension to councils as they work through their various issues. In addition to that, the latest indication from Timeline is somewhere in the March to June period they will be looking to establish their chief executives and board appointments to the 4 local establishment board entities, which I understand is the predecessor then to the 4 entities if that's where it ends up. And just the final couple of points is that I'm not aware that the Water Services Entity bill has yet been introduced to the House, but that's showing on their timeline as happening in this period. And by July 22nd, July this year, they're looking at the first tranche of money being available under the Better Off funding to councils. So that's my understanding of where the process is at, which may help inform the discussion you're about to have. Thanks.
So we have 4 options in front of us. One is to oppose the reforms and engage in their campaign. One is to oppose the reforms as a separate council. Option 3 is to support the government and assist it with the reform program. And option 4 is to maintain the status quo as neither a protagonist nor antagonist. So, are there first of all any questions or clarifications sought by councillors? Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, after the report from the Chief Executive, it sounds as though the government is proceeding with this 4 authority type system, just as they were planning to anyway, even though there's supposed to be a working group feedback to them in February. So that there's no idea that they might be even thinking about tweaking the model or changing anything from what was just said. Am I correct?
So the latest update from the Three Waters Working Group was received last week, and they have met late January. They did include a presentation from their legal and constitutional advisors on the core concepts of accountability, oversight, control and decision making, followed by a presentation on financial capacity, financial separation and the view of the ratings agency. They also heard around terms of models and some of the lessons learned from water infrastructure investment prioritisation from the Bay of Plenty, and a presentation from the Communities for Local Democracy group, which is the group that has been formed in opposition to that. They've had 4 meetings. They're now heard about a number of different models and other vital considerations. They're now going into the deliberation of those models. The word from the chairman is that he is clear that within the context of their terms of reference, there will be quite a range of potential improvements to the ownership, representation and accountability arrangement for the water services entities, including several alternative options to evaluate and form a view on. Their presentation back to government needs to be done before the end of February.
thank you. I understand that. I actually went and read their agenda, and it's just listening to what the chief executive said about what the government's planning to do and keep with their steps and keeping those 4 entities. It doesn't sound like they're thinking about changing any of their thinking. That was all, and yet they are due to have the working party feed back to them in February. So I'm just wondering how effective it's going to be.
Councillor Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is how up to date are we as a table with the latest movements in this whole process? I refer to, I think, a workshop or a briefing we had here last year when the representative from the government, Chris, what was his name? Chris Purchase came and presented to us. And there was what can only be described as a huge amount of gaps in information because the information that he was able to share didn't have any detail at all. And here we are some months on in a position where we need to make a decision. And I'm just wondering, has there been a vacuum of information coming through from Wellington, or is there stuff that's come through that we just haven't had a chance to workshop on?
Certainly from the government there hasn't been much. They have indicated through their through different media, I suppose, circles that the program is progressing. You have been sent what I gathered, all the information that was pre-Christmas, around I can't quite remember the date, but I think it was about the 10th of December somewhere. And also since then what the body of the transition unit is working on as well. So you've had all that information to digest, and that is why this paper is in front of you today, to work out whether we actually continue or not to how we advocate in the future. Deputy Mayor Mason.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up to that, could it be that the gaps that Councillor Bishop is talking to are potentially going to be informed by the information requests that are further being made? I mean, it's only, I think, a year or so ago we had to provide a whole lot of information, and now we're being requested to provide, or officers are being requested to provide a whole lot more information about contracts, and I don't know whether it's reasonable to provide that or not, or what the confidentiality is, but could it be that, based on Councillor Bishop's question, that request for information to fill in those gaps is what's being asked now?
Hard to say. I think this is an ongoing developing situation in terms of, and today's situation is, I suppose, how we advocate in the future. Do we do it alone? Do we support the other group? Or do we just try to influence the working party, or do we wait till the government announce things and then try to get the best deal that we can for the Horowhenua later on? Councillor Jennings.
If there's no further questions, I was proposing to move recommendation 2.3, 2.4 and 2.5 in block.
Councillor Tupper.
I'll second it.
So I have a mover and a seconder for 2.3, 2.4, 2.5. So the matter's open for discussion. Councillor Jennings.
Yeah, look, I'm just going to make some very brief opening remarks. I sort of sit here in a somewhat frustrated position with the government. I think there's been a real lack of progress on the issues that we genuinely raised in our letter of September last year. It's really frustrating to see that there hasn't even been a response to that letter from any government agency. And this continued focus on a centralised model, and coupled with what I believe now was a process in August and September last year that now appears to be really disingenuous and a bit of a sham in terms of a process. look, I have really strong personal views around Three Waters, but that is absolutely supported by the public views that I've seen and that have been communicated to me. And at this moment, I honestly do not believe that the model that is being proposed by the government is in the best interests of the people of this community. And probably worse than that at this point is that I simply do not have confidence and do not trust my government in relation to the Three Waters reforms because of what happened with the process last year. So I'm very much in favour of joining the Communities for Local Democracy group. I see that they have procured a report by Castalia, which provides some really sensible, common sense approaches and suggestions around alternative models and alternative options. And so I would really like to see us support those. It's the final thing I'll say is that I think our letter of September last year that was, an effort between staff and some further refinement through elected members. That was a really, sensible, measured response to the government's reforms that suggested some real ways in which things could be improved and obviously articulated a number of the issues, and we simply just do not have the answers to those, and it feels that the government is progressing just without seemingly wanting to engage on those issues. So for those reasons, that's why I've moved option 1.
Councillor Allen.
Mr. Mayor, there are a number of significant problems with the government's current position and its agenda. I agree with the comments that Councillor Jennings has made. The first problem is that the current position is founded on a broken promise. The government promised an opt-out clause. It broke that promise. It didn't even have the decency, as Councillor Jennings has said, to reply to our feedback, detailed, thoughtful feedback that we provided on the 30th of September last year. The second problem is the sheer size of the entities, and that will not go away. How do we get our needs and priorities to register with 27 authorities in Entity C? The third problem, and very strongly connected to that, is that wider issue of local voice, local accountability for local decision making. The Minister has pledged to revisit this, but as questions elicited by Councillor Mitchell and so on, where is that at? Given the government has pledged it's going to go ahead anyway, it's a case of trust us to bring some local democracy into it. We're looking at it. The government's already broken the key promise. Why should we trust it on this one? The fundamental premise around this is that central government will do a better job. How does that make sense? Look at State Highway 1. How can we believe that central government, with its record on roading, is going to do better with the Three Waters? The bottom line is that well-planned, adequately funded Three Waters delivered at a local level and reflecting local needs is the answer. How can this be done? Central government needs to look in the mirror and understand that the subsidy which applies to roading could also be applied to Three Waters. It's about partnership. We know many local authorities struggle to fund infrastructure because of the challenges of rates levels and debt ceilings. With roading, government comes to the party, and Three Waters is like this. Kiwis are entitled to such basic rights as safe roads and clean drinking water wherever they live or wherever they travel. Successive governments have acknowledged this with weighty subsidies on local roads over many years. Why can we not look at other models, such as that one? It's never too late. I urge the government to acknowledge its current position for what it is, a dog's breakfast. Pause and think partnerships. So in conclusion, I support the resolution or the recommendation on the table because, one, the subsidy arrangement I personally favour is not on the table. It's not an option. Secondly, the objectives contained on the website of the Communities for Local Democracies broadly align with my values. And in terms of having a meaningful impact on the government, this is currently that ginger group, if you will, that is currently the only game in town. It's the only option which is likely to have sufficient weight to make an impact on government's thinking.
Councillor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to those opening two speeches because they do reflect a lot of what I'm thinking. But I'm not here to proffer my views. I'm here to reflect the views of those of our community who have, in amongst a climate of COVID seems to control every conversation. This has really struck a nerve with our local community, and they do understand somewhat of what is potentially going to happen here. And I've been placed numerous times in a position where I can't add any value to the conversation other than what they know because we don't have that information ourselves. And here we are as the gatekeepers of probably the biggest asset that this community has invested in over the decades, and we are potentially going to vote to transfer this away from our ratepayers, and we don't know the mechanics of it. I'm happy to be persuaded from the table this afternoon if you can add some fact into the situation. I certainly couldn't get that from the presentation from the government's representative here in a workshop as to how they were going to deliver this in a much more effective, efficient, more cost-effective way for our community into the future. But there's one final thing, Mr. Mayor, and it's in the report that you've put together here, which jumped off the page to me, and it's under option 2, where under the heading oppose reforms as a separate council, and under disadvantages, the second bullet point states, the chances of success are likely less as a single voice amongst the noise. And that underpins, I think, why I'm going to support in favour of the motion that's been put on, because if the Horowhenua representation of its needs and its work program into the future is to sit amongst Entity C and the massive amount of work program needed in that whole entity, I am very nervous that our efforts will be seen as just noise, as you've stated. And I think we need to certainly back the other 24 councils who have seen a similar need to form some sort of alliance where the voice is not just noise. And I'm very pleased to say that I will be supporting the motion. Councillor Tupapua.
Yeah, I too support all the points made by previous speakers, especially that opt-out is no longer available. Led to believe it was, but then I'm not surprised that they turned around and did that. Also, the whole diluting of the local voice under the proposed entity C in which we'd sit. And then there's 2 other points I want to, well, probably 3 actually. 15,000 is a small price to pay for the value of our assets, multiple millions of dollars. And of 67 councils, 25 are currently in this campaign, which is more than a third and strong enough to be heard. Yeah, and like you said about that single voice, yeah, we'd get a far better outcome within that group. My last point is to the Māori community, to hapu and marae, and that is, don't be fooled, because under this regime, they can have unwarranted access to marae. It is, it's currently written, and I'm sure plenty of other Māori wouldn't be in favour of that. I mean, there's kawa and tikanga that needs to be applied when you enter a marae, and they think they can just trump it. No, they can't.
Councillor Browning.
Yeah, listen, I'm just going to support the motion. I'll do it somewhat nervously, I guess. It doesn't totally sit well with me. But the options, the other options, just don't sit with me at all. As a lone voice, as Councillor Bishop said well, as a lone voice, we've got no chance to be good. Simple as that. At least in this option, we have an opportunity to, with other councils, to be heard. And I keep again, like some other councillors, keep being pulled back to the fact that we were told, again, as we heard tonight, there would be an opt-out. It hasn't happened. It's been disingenuous, totally. And I also think about the path this community's been on, this council's been on in the last 10 years or so or longer, in terms of water upgrades, wastewater upgrades, taking all our wastewater, only 5% of our wastewater out of the rivers, to land disposal. We've done the hard yards, we've done the mahi, and all of a sudden we have no say. It just doesn't sit well. So I'll keep it brief. I will be supporting the motion.
I'll push the button.
Sorry, Councillor Keru, would you like to say something?
Tēnā koe te rangatira. Taku kupu hei mu I a tātou, e kupu kore take te kāwanatanga o tēnei take te kaupapa hei mu I o tātou. Nā te me, kare rātou e homai ki a mātou, ngā take hei mua ke te tepu, ngā take o tātou o te kawanatanga. Engari, kei te tautoko au ngā kōrero e pane ki te kaupapa o tātou kaunihere, ki te tautoko o tātou. Nō reira tēnā koutou. I just really wanted to say that, I used that word, koretake, and that's not a nice word in terms of some of the process that we were promised, the lack of information that didn't come, and I'm just really supporting what we all thought that was going to be a process that we were going to be part of, and that hasn't taken place for us. And our community, our iwi hapu, this is going to affect us, and at least we can, as a council, can work together with other councils to be able to give our people a voice. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, thank you. Can I just put my own view? I will not be supporting the motion as it sits on the table at the moment. While I agree with many of the comments that have been made by all those that have supported that, I don't feel that this is the best way to actually act in the best interests of our ratepayers. Unfortunately, this issue has become basically a pro or anti-government issue, and I think that is taken away from the actual purpose of the reforms, because everybody agrees that we cannot act in the present situation the way we do currently, with many unconsented treatment plants and wastewater treatment plants, in the way that we don't look after and respect our water as what we do, as much as we should do. One of the things that I have a great more confidence in is the ability of the working party to actually put forward many of the issues and topics and consider the changes and alterations that could be made to the reforms to actually satisfy many of the objections. And most of those objections are around accountability, service delivery, representation, and I believe that they will actually help and assist the government to actually change some really bad aspects of the reforms. And I know that you have all said that the community is dead against this. Figures and surveys that I've seen indicate that the vast majority of the community do not even understand what is going on here. It has purely become, do you support the government or do you not support the government? And that is, unfortunately, a pretty easy question to answer in these reforms. There are faults, we know that, but I still believe that there are over this, 60%, 55, 60% of councils who have not supported this local democracy group. So they must think that there are better ways to actually advocate. And I do believe that we could make sure that the interests of the Horowhenua are seen to be much more focused than within even a group of 24 as they are. I do believe that I do consider the $15,000 because I know how tight money is around this table, and a lot of those questions get asked at each round of budgeting. Should we be spending that sort of money? And so I, as I said, will not be supporting the motion. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. I am going to support the motion because I really think that one council, when there are so many councils, that this government is not going to take individual councils' opinions into account. It's just too complicated for them to do that. They need to have a message coming from a number of councils singing the same tune. I mean, I agree that we do need Three Waters reform, and indeed so does this campaign group. They agree that we need Three Waters reform. That's not in question. It's just the model that's in question. And I don't see how 4 geographically huge entities is actually going to achieve the efficiency that the government is going to want, just because we are so far away from one another and so different. The Castalia report clearly says that there are other models, and that how you actually interpret the information and the evidence is key to actually working out which model is going to work, or models are going to work for New Zealand. That might not be the same model for Auckland as it is for this area or this region. So certainly we need to work together better with other people, maybe not just in our small districts, and we need to be able to maybe have efficiency in design and resources across the country, but not where you have to go out with your hand out for a pot of money. I do worry that places like the Horowhenua, which have actually done a pretty good job with our Three Waters so far, certainly the Two Waters so far, could be at a disadvantage when we've got other areas that really haven't spent money on their infrastructure, and they could be prioritised over us. So I think that we could lose out because of that. So I think we do need a numbers game giving that message. I don't necessarily have a lot of confidence that even the government's going to take a lot of notice of the working group, having experience in other areas with working groups in government. And the Castalia report certainly says that they don't think the current model is necessarily going to achieve the outcomes that the government wants. And we need to push for a model that is going to actually achieve the outcomes that the government and all of us want, which is better environmental and health and economic outcomes. So I think our best chance is actually to have a group together pushing the same message. And I'm pretty sure, reading some of the members of that group, there are also mayors and CEs of some of those district councils that belong to the campaign group that are also part of the working party. I'm pretty sure. So I don't think that one is exclusive of the other. They can work hand in hand. So I will definitely be supporting that motion.
Councillor
I'd just like to indicate that I'll also be supporting that motion. There's not a lot I can add to what everyone's already said here today, but I'd just really like to congratulate Councillor Allen. I thought that was fantastic, and everything that you said in there I totally agreed with. And I know the working party is working hard, or the working group is working hard, and but the evidence I've seen of how this has been handled so far, I don't think they're going to get a result any which way loose, and I would not like to be supporting someone that's obviously quite happy to lie and tell difference and tell us things that they and then change them at the last minute when we don't have any control over them. So just for that reason alone, plus what everyone else has said, I will definitely be supporting this motion.
Councillor Casey.
It's a bit of a tough one. Just listening to what everyone's saying, absolutely agree with what you've said, but I am going to I agree with Mayor Bernie. I'm not 100% confident that those 24 councils are going to make a difference, to be honest. The amount of stuff that's already on the ministry page and what they're talking about, I think I'm going to have faith in this working party. I think they're doing a good job so far, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out at the end of February, and so I won't be supporting that motion.
Thank you. So, anyone else? No. Okay. So, the motion's on the table. 2.3, that we oppose the Three Waters reform. 2.4, we apply to join the campaign as a campaign partner. And 2.5, request the Chief Executive to allocate $15,000 from within existing budgets for the joining fee. Oh, sorry. Right of replies, Councillor Jennings.
Sorry, look, I won't take too long, and I always hate speaking before Councillor Allen because he comes in with such an articulate and impassioned speech that it makes me look like a fool. So I've got to come back and do some tidy up. But look, I think that probably just, having listened to all the speakers, I think it's really important to communicate to our community that in a Three Waters space, my impression over this last 2 year term is that we are actually in a very strong position as a community in terms, certainly in relation to two of the Three Waters, and there's some further work to do, particularly in the stormwater space, and I think we've identified that and we've planned for that and we've committed funding to do some of that work. And look, I acknowledge, Mr. Mayor, your comments around this issue becoming, very polarising, and I think the government itself has played a role in characterising this as an anti-government position that people are taking. But for me, I keep coming back to the fact that it's been the government's own actions that have undermined trust, have undermined that good faith partnership and engagement process. There seems to be a dismissive attitude towards the value of that local voice. And I think that sitting over the top of that, it's just the impression of an agenda that is to box on with this, despite there being good ideas around improvements and different approaches, and also, I guess, the genuine articulation of issues and problems. And so, look, I've heard what others have said, and I think that we can be reassured that the group that this council will join, if this motion passes, would become the 27th council actually to sign on. And I understand that there is some momentum still growing, but I think in doing that we join a constructive and solutions focused advocacy group, and I think that that's what's needed right now, is to advocate as a strong, unified group that share a common set of values and objectives. So, look, I hope this, hearing the speakers, I'm pretty confident this is going to pass, but I think this is a good move for our community.
So, I don't need to repeat 2.3, 2.4, 2.5. All those in favour? Just raise your hands, thanks. Yeah. Against?
Sorry, I was for it.
You can't vote twice.
Can we call for division?
We can call for division if you wish. Yes? Okay, so I did see actually Grayson had that up before. So, Councillor Allen.
For.
Councillor Bishop.
For.
Councillor Brannigan.
For.
Councillor Isaacs.
For.
Councillor Jennings.
For.
Councillor Kay Simmons.
Against.
Councillor Kedu. You there, Robert?
Yes, for.
Are you for? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Deputy Mayor Mason. Councillor Mitchell.
For.
Councillor Tukapua.
For.
And I'm against. So the motion is carried. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to 3. Thank you. Okay. All right. So moving on to our next item on the agenda, which is the Chief Executive's report on page 8.3. No, that's been superseded by that, yeah. Okay. So on page 43, just can I move receipt of the report and 2.1, 2.2? Councillor Isaacs, Councillor Allen, all those in favour? Thank you. You'll see that we do have one recommendation there, which is regards to the annual plan, and there also is a late recommendation, which basically encapsulates what is included on part of 3.6. So, which is the application by the Horowhenua Sports Trust to release funds. And you'll notice the very last line of that note number refers to that this note requests the release of the fund to a maximum of $322,000 to the Horowhenua Sports Trust. And that should be now included as a recommendation that we need to adopt or otherwise. So, is there any questions on, we'll just on the report itself initially, and then we will go back to the two recommendations. Deputy Mayor Mason.
Can I make a comment as opposed to a question? I just wanted to acknowledge Parks and Property and all the people who work as contractors to Parks and Property for their Green Flag Awards. I think that we've got 5 for this district is pretty significant, and they've been hard earned, and we've got some very dedicated contractors, volunteers, and our teams in both rec services and Parks and Property. So that's I just wanted to acknowledge that's there in the body of the report.
And I suppose I should ask the Chief Executive if he's got anything to add to his report.
No, Mr. Mayor, nothing further to add, thanks. Very well handled.
Thank you. Okay, so in that case...
You're there, Bernie?
Sorry, Councillor Kedu. Robert.
Yes, just wanted to add that, you know, the green spaces that have been created in our district, they're fantastic work. And just wanted to acknowledge some of the work that within the Te Maire space, working with our officers and iwi and also community to be able to put packages together where sponsorship from other parties can be part of that green space in terms of power going into Te Maire Park and other iwi initiatives where the iwi able to get monitors and visual aids into the whare taiao and how fantastic a space that is for our communities. So, kia ora.
Kia ora, Robert, thank you, and agree totally. And so let's move to 3.4 and 3.5, which is in respect of the annual plan. The recommendation on the table is that the Horowhenua District Council does not consult on the annual plan 2022/23 as it deems that there are no significant or material differences from the content of Year 2 of the long-term plan 2021 to 2041. I have a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Isaac, seconded Councillor Kay Simmons. Any discussion, debate? Councillor Mitchell.
Can I just clarify? I know it looks as though the answer is going to be no, but it does say there's going to be no material difference from the last long-term plan. But then it does talk about variations or departures. The delay or abandonment of projects. And I'm just thinking that with COVID and the possible ramifications of people not being able to work, and with the resources not being so available, I can imagine there may well be some delay or abandonment of projects in Year 2 that we were planning to do. If that happens, does that really does that affect the materiality, or do we just go ahead with not needing to consult because there's nothing we can do about it?
I suppose the issue is a timing one as much as anything, isn't it? Because if we signal that we are going to consult on the annual plan, we would have to start that process immediately, where we are moving into a period of uncertainty. Jacinda.
I think we definitely, because what we can be clear about is in the 3-year program that we still intend to do or have a conversation about doing the same level of work, but the particular year that it occurs in may change in terms of what you're saying, given some of the forecasting conversations and what happens with COVID going forward. So we could add some words if you'd like to clarify that over the 3-year period, there wouldn't be a material difference to the long-term plan.
Yeah, and it's even possible that it might be pushed out to the 4th, year 4 or 5, mind it. But we're not planning to change what we're going to do. It just might be when. So that doesn't affect the material difference.
It shouldn't do from a long-term plan perspective, no.
Councillor Bishop.
Similar question from myself around when will we fully know the projected spend and what projects are going to potentially either be carried forward or fall off the radar, because it's okay to kick the can down the road, but at some time we need to make an honest call as to what we think we can deliver. We've asked our community to fund this, and we know that there's a big gap in this current year, and we don't know what, as has been mentioned, what impact could potentially be had on the delivery, not just the staffing side, but the supply side. And I just don't think we should be sailing on as if all will be well, and we will be able to complete, if not this year, next year, when the reality might be quite different. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to address that point, Councillor Bishop, we are reforecasting at the moment, and that will be coming forward to the Finance Audit and Risk Committee meeting towards the end of February. Jacinda, do you want to add to that? But they are very well made points.
Absolutely well, and I think one conversation that we had through the Project Steering Committee that's probably worth mentioning here is the conversation around the capital program and the change in timing of that and the impact that has in terms of depreciation and interest, and making sure that if our program is delayed, that those people that have contributed towards the interest and the depreciation, that needs to roll forward and be a benefit for future years for those people rather than paying for what they've already paid for. So that conversation in terms of what that looks like, we can have as part of the firstly the FAR committee and then ongoing council meetings for future plans.
So, thank you. So I guess what I'm after is, like
you've mentioned, when is the date that we have to make that decision by whether we are going to consult or not? Because we haven't got the information to make that today. We haven't got the information to make that call, probably not even at the FAR committee, or maybe the subsequent council meeting. And it's a big decision, and I think we need to have some advice on it.
I suppose the question then needs to be asked, Jacinda, is what is considered material and significant in terms of the Act, and how much of a change from the current thing? Is there, a bit of leeway, or is it pretty set in stone in terms of what our auditors or even Standard & Poor's might consider that is significant?
I'll go back and look specifically in terms of what guides that as our significance and engagement policy ourselves, specifically in terms of the level of change that we have between the plans. So I can come back, we can bring that forward in terms of the conversation with the FAR committee in terms of the program. But just quickly in terms of the timing, I guess we are usually going, I know Tiffany talked through this when we went through the workshops prior to Christmas, but we are usually going out to consult in and around the March time. So there isn't to allow the sufficient time in terms of consultation. That is something that we do need to be working on and deciding relatively soon.
Councillor Jennings.
Mr. Mayor, the other thing that is just on my radar, and I think Councillor Tukupa will also be aware of this, is that there's been some commentary on a young elected member's Facebook page about the impact of the Three Waters stimulus money, notwithstanding the decision we've just made in the previous agenda item, but the impact of the funding that might come through those channels and what that means in terms of annual plans and the extent to which that should be captured, or it would trigger in itself a consultation process. And I was wondering whether there might be some merit in perhaps engaging with some other councils around how they're going to manage that particular issue, or perhaps get some advice from our auditor, because I think that would be useful. Acknowledging, as I say, we've made a decision about Three Waters in the previous agenda item, so it's not as if we're going to be running ahead and trying to grab some money on the 1st of July, but presumably, that there may be within that financial year some impact in terms of funding through that reform process if things don't go our way. So, just guess I wanted to be conscious of that and how we deal with that. So maybe we could follow up around that.
I think we actually probably need to talk to LGNZ and others around that, because there are the indications were when we were doing the annual plan and the long-term plan was that we had to indicate, regardless of what was going to happen within the Three Waters space, with the understanding that we were likely to receive some funding, but that we would continue as if it was almost business as usual. Whether that advice has changed or not, I don't know.
Mr. Mayor, just in response to that, I totally agree with your position. I just wanted to flag that there's certainly some discussion happening amongst other elected members and other councils, and I just thought it was prudent to flag that as something that we might need some further thought.
Just quickly, we can absolutely follow up with that, and we've always, in our conversations internally as well, and probably with you through the processes, it's very likely that in terms of not this annual plan coming, but the following one, that we would likely need to do an LTP amendment, given both from a negotiating position with the Crown in terms of Three Waters going forward, but also to make sure that all those types of things that have changed in the environment are included within that plan.
Deputy Mayor Mason.
So it was my understanding from when we had the conversation back in December that we had done the mahi through the long-term plan process, that we had a significant plan that we were quite confident with in place in terms of the long-term plan indicated year 1 as well as year 2, and that we had agreed that we would, rather than spend the time consulting, I guess back ourselves in terms of what we agreed with that plan. And I don't think anything has changed. We still are backing ourselves in terms of that year 2 of the long-term plan being our annual plan for this year. The variances that we talk about that will be impacted potentially by COVID, supply chain issues and that sort of thing, they're able to be explained as variances. They're things that are out of our control. I would like to see us go forward and back ourselves and save the officers the time, not that I want to discredit in any way the consultation we do with the community, but give the community confidence that those conversations we had a year ago and that they contributed to in terms of our decision making, we actually get on and do. So I'd like to see us give officers the confidence just to get ahead and plan the work and deliver, because we're asking for delivery.
Councillor Mason, would you, Deputy Mayor Mason, prepare to move the recommendation? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mitchell? Any further? Oh, had it?
Yeah.
I didn't think we had. Sorry, that was just the receipt of the report. So any further debate or discussion, Councillor Brannigan?
Yeah, I think just the point that Councillor Mason made is good. That's what the general guidance I think we gave earlier, and it was only general guidance mainly. But I'm comforted by Jacinta's comments around, and I think hopefully it would give Councillor Bishop some comfort around perhaps an LTP amendment in year 3 to look at, because I think they will very clearly know then what any material differences will be. So if that provides that comfort, I don't know if we need to, and that's been moved, so that's fine, I'm comfortable with that.
Nothing further? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Councillor Bishop noted. The motion's carried. Thank you. So now moving to the other recommendation in terms of 3.6, which is the Horowhenua Sports Trust release of funds. So the motion or the recommendation is that the Horowhenua District Council approves the release of a maximum total of $322,000 from the Hockey Turf Replacement Fund to the Horowhenua Sports Trust. Arthur, is there anything you wish to add to the report that's in here?
No. You want to add that it's for replacement of the turf and revision repairs of the floodlight poles, so it's clear.
Yes.
Nothing specific, Councillor, Your Worship. The issue is just that this is an existing fund. It usually is used for the replacement of the sports turf, but there has been an issue with the lights, so there is a slight variation in that. Whilst it would normally be used for the sports surface only, there is a need to do some repairs to the lights down there as well, floodlights.
So we have added to the recommendation that the money is for the replacement of the turf and emergency repair of the floodlights. I'm prepared to move. Is there someone who can second that? Councillor Isaacs, any further discussion? All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Brings us to 8.4, which is Council Facilities COVID-19 Protection Framework. The purpose of this is to provide Council with information regarding the COVID-19 protection framework and staff vaccination policy to enable decisions to be made on whether a My Vaccine Pass is required by the public to enter Council facilities. Could I just move to 3.1 and 3.2 that the report be received? All those in favour, moved, seconded by Councillor Allen. All those in favour? Against, carried. Thank you. Noting online that we have from Mid Central is Melanie Miller. Welcome, Melanie. And Melanie here is to answer any clinical questions that you might have around this topic. But first of all, I'd like to ask the Chief Executive to introduce the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Health and Safety at Work Act imposes a primary duty of care to ensure the health and safety of our staff and visitors, both to our workplaces and facilities, and it's through that lens that we've prepared this advice. The Act goes on to impose a duty to eliminate risks to health and safety, so far as reasonably practical, and eliminate, and if it's not reasonably practical to eliminate the risk, then to minimise the risk so far as reasonably practical. The advice that we've received and which is provided by health authorities is the transmission of COVID-19 does propose a risk to health and safety, both of our staff and visitors to council work sites and facilities. The central government guidance provides confirmation that services at facilities provided by local government can require a My Vaccine Pass from the public. We've completed a consultation with our staff, and as is noted in the paper, we've reached a policy which has been outlined in page 52 of the council papers, and we're now going on, that's in relation to our staff and facilities, and we are now recommending that as of the 21st of February 2022, that the council requires the presentation of a valid My Vaccine Pass by the public when entering the council facilities, as outlined on page 53, to address the risks that I have outlined earlier in relation to our staff visitors to the site, and therefore to comply with the Health and Safety at Work Act. Thanks.
So, any clarification questions of the Chief Executive or Melanie, who is on Zoom? Councillor Tukapua.
I'll just ask a couple of David first, if that's okay. So, I heard you read the paragraph, page 51, that central government now confirms that services such as libraries, galleries, pools and museums can require a My Vaccine Pass. So is it can or must, or I'm just checking the language?
Can.
Okay. So it's not mandated. Right, just getting that clear. And then in reference to yourself, it says at the bottom of page 50 and over to 51 that the Chief Executive has proposed adopting a low tolerance approach. And then it goes on to say that the government's being clear in its messaging, goes on to say a low tolerance approach aligns with this messaging. So do you believe that the government is the single source of truth?
Can you repeat that question, please?
Do you believe the government is the single source of truth around this?
I'm not qualified to provide any clinical comments, and to that I think we would turn to Melanie, other than to note that I am reliant on the advice that I do receive from central government.
Okay, one last question for you then. Is it double standards to provide staff the option for testing and not the community?
No, because at this point in time, there is an issue around the availability of rapid antigen tests. That situation could change, but right here at the moment, we're not in a position to, well, the public are not in a position to have access to rapid antigen tests as a means of proving or otherwise that they have COVID.
Oh, is it not available in Palmerston North or in the mid-central area? Is it not available in Palmerston North or anywhere in the mid-central area? Is it you're just referring that it's not available in the Horowhenua?
My understanding at the moment is that rapid antigen tests aren't available, for example, through pharmacies for purchase by the general public. What is happening at the moment is that supplies are being made available by government for critical workers, and equally we at this point have secured some rapid antigen tests to enable for our staff purposes, but they're not in widely available yet. There are supply constraints.
I'll ask my questions of the medical professional after others have had turn.
Okay. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question about the Shannon School pool, which is administered by council, I understand, but during school hours, is it used just as a school pool by the children that go to that school as opposed to out of hours when it becomes a community use facility? Would it be possible to separate the hours out so it could still be used as a school pool in school time?
Through you, Your Worship, Horowhenua Aquatics look after Shannon School pool throughout the school holiday period. So our contract with Shannon Schools has completed now that school's back in. So we're only there for that 6 week summer break.
So, any further questions? Councillor Tukapua, you indicated you had some questions for Melanie.
I was led to believe that my questions I emailed in earlier were passed on. It says referred to the health representative, so I'd like to hear those answers and everyone else can hear them at the same time. Is that right? And then I'll...
Yeah, can I just clarify something before I start answering anything? I don't actually work for the DHB. I work for the Immunisation Advisory Centre out of University of Auckland.
That's great.
I thought Patrick was going to be here as well to help with those questions, but I have got answers that are written down. I'm not sure which ones are yours, so...
Sorry, Lisa, did you want to add something?
Through you, Your Worship. Just to clarify, Dr. Patrick O'Connor had been waiting online since 4:30, so he did have to go. He has emailed through some responses, which hopefully have been circulated, and if not, I'm sure that they can be whilst we're in here. Just to answer majority of your questions around coming from the DHB scenario, Councillor Tukapua. Melanie is here, as she said, from the vaccinations educator type questions that she'll be able to answer.
So the I think it's, bear with me, the information we have before us notes that vaccination provides protection in 3 ways, and the first 2 are for yourself and the third is for others, that being
minimising likelihood of infection, and then reducing the seriousness of illness of that infection. And then the third is reducing the likelihood of transmission. So transmission is one of the areas I want to focus on, because this is why we would recommend to implement this next measure as opposed to the measures we've currently been using. So we're proposing to exclude non-vaccinated people to libraries, pools, and this building. And yet we have kept open through even the Christmas and peak traffic travelling period our public toilets, which, the Horowhenua, by and large, our stats around cases and things are low to nil. Even with the Omicron, we were at 0 last week. I was waiting for the update this week. I haven't seen it. But 0 was where we were tracking. And yet we've had these public toilets and everybody using them, passerbyers, you name it, and we've got a lot of them. And so in regards to transmission, wouldn't these also be key areas to limit or shut down? I know we can't vaccine past them because we can't police or monitor that because there's no cameras, or we're not going to put staff standing there. So it's either you leave them open or you close them. So what's your risks measure on public toilets and transmission?
So, as far as public toilets are concerned, people are not normally in there for a long time. And COVID is primarily, it's transmitted by aerosol from one person to another directly. So unless
not surface touching or anything like that.
Not so much surface touching, no. If you sneeze into your hand and then you shake somebody's hand, then, yes, obviously. But the other thing is that when most people, I would hope everybody, when they've finished using the facilities, are going to wash their hands. So if they've picked anything up in there, they're going to wash their hands before they leave. Yeah. They should be wearing a mask while they're in there, but they're not in there for very long. So there is a risk, but it's not a high one. When you talk about libraries and swimming pools, people are normally in there for longer than 10 minutes. They're exercising and breathing heavily. So if you're breathing heavily, then you're in a pool or a gym or whatever. If you're breathing heavily, then those aerosols can go further because you're breathing out harder. And the same with libraries. Obviously you're not exercising in a library, but people will tend to spend quite a lot of time in a library and be passing by each other more and that kind of thing. So the risk is probably higher. But as you said, you can't really control who's going in and out of a public laboratory. And the risk of closing the public lavatories is that you have people who are passing through, having nowhere to go and doing it on the side of the road, which is probably a higher general risk to health than people spending 5 or 10 minutes in a public toilet.
And who of the vaccinated or unvaccinated are more likely to be asymptomatic?
Unvaccinated people are likely to be asymptomatic, more likely to be asymptomatic, which also means that they're less likely to pass it on because they're not carrying a huge viral load. So they're less likely to pass it on to other people, and they're less likely to be suffering from symptoms themselves. So they're not going to be coughing or sneezing, which is one of the ways that any of these respiratory viruses are spread.
So who was that, sorry? Oh, yeah.
So vaccinated people are more likely to be asymptomatic, but they're less likely to pass it on as well because their viral load will be smaller. Yeah. They're not going to have those coughs and sneezes and things that will spread it further.
Yeah. What are the treatment protocols, and this is for public viewing, and because there's lots of mixed messages out there. Treatment protocols, either if you're going to a doctor, what they would advise as, or what you can do for yourself at home.
What if you test positive?
Yeah.
Not a lot, to be honest. You have to ride it out. There are antivirals. I'm not sure how widely available they are here. So there is an antiviral medication, but I'm not. I know it's going through approval, but I'm not sure how widely available it is. That has to be given very early on. But apart from that, it's like getting a cold or the flu. There isn't really a treatment protocol. So it's sort of stay warm, keep up the fluids, take paracetamol as required, and stay away from other people.
Right. Okay. Are you familiar at all with any of the MedSafe data? And could you, or I know you said you're from Auckland University, and I'm not sure.
I have seen the MedSafe data. Yes.
Yeah, I guess where I'm going with that is, so what do they call it? An AEFI, an adverse event following immunisation.
Yeah.
And so obviously if someone was to experience that, unless it's reported or even a doctor acknowledges it, it doesn't go on the numbers. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that is all of the reported cases that have come through, and that is anything that's happened within a couple of weeks of people having the vaccine. So that the numbers on there are artificially high because some of them, after investigation, are not related to the vaccine. They are, they've not been caused by the vaccine.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen some of those tables in there. They do look some far out numbers that.
Yeah.
But there was some that was interesting to me, simply because it's been brought to my attention by locals, and one of them actually, because why I perked up when you said you're from Auckland University, one of these cases is being referred up there. So on the MedSafe data, it talks about myocarditis and how there is an alert that's been raised, and how vaccinators are meant to provide information around that before they administer a vaccine to you. And basically it's a heart condition or reaction in this case, and the numbers they estimate is about 30 people in a million would experience that. That's if I'm reading it right. And I guess if we talk about the team of 5 million, it's 150 people could potentially experience that. Now, if that was the case, it blows me away that 5 young Māori women in the Horowhenua that I know have all had that reaction.
Right.
I have spoken, because I've spoken to each of those individuals directly. Their ages are 17, 25, 31, 35, 39. They've all told me their stories, what happened. And one of those cases have been sent up to you after their first vaccine. And so they've been advised from your advisory group not to get the second yet until test results are done, etc. So 5 people, or 5 young Māori women that I know that could occur to is just a bit too close to home. But then if it's only meant to be 30 people in a million, how is it that in the Horowhenua alone that could happen to 5? And I mean, that's just who I know. That's the kind of risks that are either go unrecorded or unnoticed. And when we hear that Māori are a priority, or should be, the care for these young women is not happening to the level that you would expect, or the support. And that's why there are genuine concerns around getting a second or getting a booster. And unless there was some sort of accountability or responsibility from government that would say to you, actually, no, if something like that happens to you, we'll take care of it and we'll take care of you, then perhaps would be more forthcoming. I don't know if you probably don't want to comment about that, but I'll move on to...
I can certainly comment about the myocarditis and pericarditis. So outside of COVID, the average number of myocarditis and pericarditis cases in New Zealand was about 70 to 80 every year, usually as a result of a viral infection. So the risk associated with having the COVID vaccine is about 4 times the normal, which is why there's an alert out about it and why we have had a big push and done lots of education around making sure that vaccinators and doctors and EDs are all aware of that, and what patients should do if they start experiencing those symptoms. So there's about a 4 times normal risk with the vaccine, but there's a 28 times normal risk of myocarditis or pericarditis, so heart inflammation, if you catch the virus itself. So we're looking at a relative risk. The other thing about myocarditis and pericarditis is if you seek help when the symptoms start, it is an easily treated condition, but you do need to go in to seek medical help. So that's why the vaccinators are told they do have to talk to people about that, tell them what the symptoms are, and tell them that they need to seek medical help if that happens, because it's 24 hours in hospital with anti-inflammatory medication, and majority of people will recover with no lasting effects, but only if they go and seek help.
Yeah. Two of the 5 have been in and out of hospital, but there's one in particular that's still waiting for a cardiologist appointment, and she spent up to $800 of her own money getting this far. I just wondered, where can I refer them to get better support or attention?
Yeah. So if that has happened, then that is a post-medical, it's a medical injury, and it's covered by ACC. So they need to get their GP to do an ACC claim for that support.
Good. Okay. I'm just... Actually, you could be the answer. The on page 55 of our report, it talks about the long-term efficacy and safety of the vaccine. So, and then I was just wondering, where in the country is this? It must be Auckland happening. And when did it start? And when's the finish date? And when will this information be available?
Okay, so every medication goes through the first 3 trials. Okay, so you have phase 1, which is animal trials, and then phase 2, which is a small number of people, and they're trying to work out doses, and then they have phase 3, which is thousands of people. And then it goes onto the market, and that's what we're doing at the moment. So it's in the market, and it's being very closely monitored as to its safety, because you can go from like 100,000 people in a stage 3 trial to millions of people, and very rare events will then start to rear their head once it happens with every medication, and there's nothing new or extra that's happening with these vaccines above and beyond. But so what's happening in the University of Auckland is they are collating data, safety data, adverse event data internationally, and that I think is set to, the first results should be out next year, I think, 2023. like the global results, and I think it's 2023, but I don't actually have a specific date, I'm afraid. But it is being looked at. They're using big data computers to collate all that information at the University of Auckland. So that's where the University of Auckland comes in. It's a sort of data collation centre.
So that's the global, but is New Zealand doing?
So all of New Zealand's data, so every report that comes in. So anything here that is reported through the CALM pathway. So if it happens at the vaccination site, then they can do that through the CIR recording, the COVID immunisation record. If it's later on, then anyone can go on to CALM, the Centre for Adverse Reaction Monitoring, and make a report. Anyone can, and they all go to the same place. So any member of the public, GP, practice nurse, your next door neighbour, they can go on and make a report that this has happened to that person following vaccination.
I've got just two more. One should be quick, hopefully. There was modelling done in a presentation that we got a copy of, which indicates that the biggest impact will be to Māori, and that 2/3 of the contracted cases will be. So are you able to explain that, how they come about?
So you're probably aware that Māori vaccination rates are lower. Mm-hmm. So that's one level of protection that is hasn't been, it hasn't been made available in a way that's palatable. But there has been some research done around genetic predisposition. It's like anything really. And I'll start that sentence again. Māori generally have worse health outcomes. They're more likely to have underlying conditions. So the rate of diabetes among Māori is much higher, the rate of heart disease, the rate of asthma and respiratory disease. Smoking is much higher. All of those things increase your risk of contracting a worse case of COVID-19.
And the last thing is studies on the safety and efficacy of pregnant women being vaccinated. Have you got some of that readily available?
Not readily available because it's not something that we not something in New Zealand that we look for. It's not recorded when they are getting their vaccine. It doesn't say it. There isn't anywhere on that record that says whether that person is pregnant or not. But internationally, there is a lot of data available that, there is no increased risk for women having this vaccination in pregnancy. There's a much higher risk for women getting the disease in pregnancy.
Even in that first trimester around miscarriages?
So the normal underlying rate of miscarriages is 1 in 4. So regardless of whether or not somebody's taken anything, the normal background rate, 1 in 4 pregnancies will end in miscarriage. That has not increased as far as anyone's reported.
Okay. There are others would be for Mid-Central. I don't think she can answer the other ones I had.
Very.
Oh, sorry.
Any further questions for Councillor Bishop?
Thank you. Just a question around facilities, and we're talking about council facilities here today. But in a community like any small provincial town community we've got, a number of public buildings that people frequent through the course of their day-to-day, throughout the months, weeks, years. What would you say are the most high-risk facilities in a district or in a town like ours, or a district like Horowhenua that has 3 or 4 small towns?
Well, anywhere where you're going to have a lot of people, a lot of people using the facility at once. So that's the reasoning behind restricting numbers. So, whether you're operating vaccine passes or not depends on how many numbers you can have in, because and how close people can get to each other. So if you've got facilities like sports facilities where you'll have a lot of people using it and staying there for an hour or so and breathing heavily, that's a higher risk area than a public toilet or an outdoor park or something like that. I am aware from traveling through your district of some of the facilities that you have available, but I don't know what else is available.
Do you think it would be fair to say that the most high-risk facility in any small town or any district would be the local supermarket, where a representative from every family in the district would frequent that place on a very regular basis?
You could argue that, I suppose.
And as opposed to council facilities where people may not darken the door from month to month.
I don't think I can have I don't think I have opinion on that. People need to get food, so you can't really compare a supermarket with an office building, but some things need to be available to people, and other things can be moved online or put off.
Councillor Mitch.
Thank you. Would you know if there's any data available about hospitalisations as vaccinated as opposed to unvaccinated people, both in New Zealand and internationally? The ratios?
Yeah, I had a feeling that would come up, so I have got some. So the raw data is available online, and that's just numbers. Excuse my dog. That's just numbers. So to date, overall, since this all started, there's been 636 people hospitalised. That's not broken down into those that have been in CCU or have died. They're just the total number in hospital. So of the people in hospital, 65% had not had a vaccination at all, and 18% had only had one, so were only partially vaccinated. 9% had been fully vaccinated, and the other 8% were not eligible. So these are like at that point under 12. So none of our under 12s fall in a fully vaccinated. So at that point they were not eligible. So it's a huge proportion of those people that are in hospital who are not vaccinated. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, it does. It basically means that nearly about 80% of people in hospital are unvaccinated. Or not,
they're either
not
unvaccinated or only partially vaccinated.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Melanie, thank you. This is just a very brief question, just for absolute clarity, and it's around unvaccinated. So the evidence is pretty clear, but it's just again for clarity. If you're unvaccinated, you're much more likely to carry a higher viral load if you contract COVID, but you're also much more likely to spread it as well. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So if you're So if you're vaccinated, you will still come into contact with the virus, and you may well get some symptoms. So I mean, from a personal point of view, you may have noticed the accent. My family all live in the UK. My sister and my niece got Omicron just before Christmas, fully vaccinated, 2 vaccines. She's not in an age group where she can have a booster over there. She was unwell for 2 days. That was it. And then she was back to normal. She had a bit of a cold for 2 days. She was not, she was not sick. So that's the kind of level of illness, if you get particularly Omicron and you're vaccinated, that you can expect. The Omicron variant, which is becoming the dominant variant here as well, it's much more transmissible. So the Delta had an R value when it first came of about 6. So for every one person who got Delta, they had the potential to infect 6 people. Omicron has an R value of about 10 if you're not vaccinated. So for every one sick person, they can potentially infect 10 other people. And they're much more likely to get severely unwell and much more likely to need hospitalization and ICU intervention. What vaccinating does is it trains your immune system to recognize that particular virus and react immediately, rather than the virus getting into you and making you ill and then your immune system catching up. And having a booster for the Omicron is the best way of protecting yourself, because over time your immunity will wane from vaccination, but it gives you a 25 times boost to have a third vaccination, and that is enough to protect you from Omicron as well. So if you do come into contact as a vaccinated person, your immune system immediately knows what to do, immediately recognizes it, and mounts a specific response with the correct antibodies and the correct way of fighting it, rather than a sort of generalized response that might develop later into a more specific one.
Thank you.
Thanks. That sounds pretty good. But the whole 6-1 and now 10-1 with Omicron, how then do you explain Palmerston North gets their first case around the 17th, 19th of January? It's 21, 22 days later, and according to the modelling, we're not at the surge point yet, but there should be, on this graph at least, after 14 days, 1,000 cases a day, and after 19 days, 5,000 cases a day. But we're still at 2.
Yes. Yeah. So I think the original case that you had actually got it from somewhere else and had come home and was isolating. So the only person they'd been in contact with was the other person that got it, who was there in their household. And they'd come in and isolated. And isolating in this case means you don't go out, you don't go to the supermarket, you don't go anywhere, you do not leave your house. But one of the things that people are being urged to do now is actually make a plan for if they do have to isolate because they've come into contact with Omicron, who is going to be able to go to the supermarket and get your bread and milk for you and leave it on the doorstep, because you cannot even go and get basics. So, making a plan for who might be able to help you out in that way. If you've got family close, if you've got a friend that might be able to help you out that way, but that's why, sorry. I think that's why it hasn't gone anywhere, because the case in Palmerston North, the same as the case, we've got a couple, I'm in Wanganui, we've got a couple here, but they have come into contact, been infected outside, realised they've been infected and isolated, so they haven't come into contact with the public at all. So that's how we're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
If we come into contact. So if people are abiding by that guidance, then it's actually a really good thing that we don't want to have 1,000 cases a day and 5,000 cases a day,
So that you're sick or you test positive, stay home. That's working effectively.
Yes.
That case came through MIQ in Christchurch,
Yeah.
and I guess that's one of the things that baffles me a little bit is to even be in MIQ, whether you're staff or passing through, after a flight, you're fully vaccinated, otherwise you can't even be there. How is it that it's still getting in those places if, you just hear it in, news stories over and over again, MIQ, another case, MIQ.
Yeah, that's not something I can really comment on in depth, I'm afraid.
Yes, Jim.
Yeah, Melanie, just a question relating to, for the purpose of this discussion around facilities, one of the things I'm really focused on is transmissibility, whether a certain group of people are more contagious than others. And in your response to Councillor Brannigan, you said that for an unvaccinated person with Omicron, the R0 or reproductive value is 10.
About 10, yeah.
About 10. So, what's the comparison to a vaccinated person? So, is there a different R value for vaccinated people, or is that just the 10 you're referencing is coupling everyone together? That's just the reproductive value for Omicron.
No, it is lower for vaccinated people, but I'm not. I haven't got that data to hand immediately, but it is lower for if somebody's vaccinated. The thing is, if you're vaccinated, if you're vaccinated yourself and you come into contact with somebody with Omicron, yes, you may well get the virus enter your body, but you will mount a response immediately, so you're unlikely to become ill. If you're not ill, and your immune system will fight that virus and get rid of it very quickly. So if the virus doesn't have a chance to replicate, then you can't pass that on as easily. So the time that you're infectious for is reduced as well. So it is less if you're vaccinated that sort of spreading, but also you're less likely to become unwell as a vaccinated person yourself.
Just one final question. Are you able to talk about rapid antigen testing? Do you know much about that? Is that within your field of expertise? No. Okay.
No, it isn't.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
That appears to be all, Melanie. Look, really appreciate the time that you've taken to be with us today. I think it's been extremely valuable in clearing up and clarifying a number of different topics around this issue. Thank you very much for your time, and give the dog a pat for being so well behaved and joining us as well. And thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Just to go back, I want to acknowledge the fact that we haven't actually heard from the public participation that we had signalled at the beginning of the agenda. So I'm just asking Grayson if he would please read that. Thank you.
To Horowhenua District Councillors, I am writing a submission against your proposal to mandate vaccination passes at public arenas in the Horowhenua. Firstly, I would like to point yourselves at your own wording regarding welcoming communities, where you talk about equitable access, connected and inclusive communities, civil engagement and participation, and welcoming public spaces. I find this extremely contradictory to your potential treatment of your existing ratepayers and their families. If the rate paying system we currently have is a user pay, then surely I am paying rates for these services I'm entitled to and their use. If you feel the need to have two classes of people in our community, then it is only fair we have two classes of rates. Which is why, if you vote to implement this mandate, open brackets, contract, not law, closed brackets, you will need to either give rebates to those ratepayers who are banned from these services, or have a two-tiered rate system for the same reason. Alternatively, are you prepared to go down the whole segregation road and build separate public spaces for unvaccinated people to use, for example, public toilets, libraries, pool, hospitals, and even public transport? If you move forward with this mandate, you should have the transparency to release the scientific studies that prove that the unvaccinated are indeed a danger to society. I would also be interested to see any study you could provide proving that masks provide any protection from viruses, as I have only found scientific studies that prove masks will increase risks of sickness and debilitating chronic disease such as cancer due to low oxygen in the blood, bacterial pneumonia from breathing back in toxins into the lungs. It beggars belief that the vaccinated are in danger from unvaccinated people, and it also beggars belief that unvaccinated people do not know when to stay home when they feel ill. Personally, I am adult enough to consider others if I'm using communal facilities such as the pool. I would not swim if I had scabies, an STD, HIV, nor the flu, which is what SARS-CoV-2 is. Further to some of your own reports, you talk about the declining mental health of our youth with increased anxiety among other issues. You are also denying said youth with spaces to connect and services available to them. Do you think implementing more controls will help alleviate any of these issues? Because I believe from my own teenager that you are making a dog's breakfast of this. Any reason you find to implement these policies will only confirm that Horowhenua District Council has no respect of law and the civil rights my grandparents fought and died for is listed below. The list below is a list from the Bill of Rights Act and list of civil and political rights, sections 8 through to 27 of the Bill of Rights Act. In anticipation you proceed with this mandate, please provide the public with the scientific evidence that you have based this decision on. Yours sincerely, M. Gilbert.
Thank you. Okay, so any further questions or clarification needed? So we have Councillor Tupapa.
Apologies, there were a couple of other, I guess if they didn't go through the right channel, public, sending in their views around this to us directly, probably should have gone this way. They're not going to be acknowledged, or I guess not. Are others familiar with the ones I'm talking about?
So have you just seen the paper that Lisa put in front of you in regards to some of those questions that were that you had asked?
I'm just talking about other public sending us what it was a submission that we directly.
No, that was the only submission received for public participation for this meeting. All others were, part of the general traffic of communication that happens to us individually or collectively, because I know there's been some that have gone direct to the Chief Executive, but there's others that we have only probably seen individually. Yeah. Councillor Jennings.
Can I just have one final question to the Chief Executive about how the facility is currently operating? So because we're at red light setting, presumably that means and we haven't got a vaccine pass requirement, that the library pools this building at the moment we're having to manage a 25-person limit. And if that's the case, can we just have a comment on how that's going?
Through you, Your Worship. In terms of the I can only comment on the libraries and aquatic centres, and community centres, sorry. Under the red light setting for public facilities, it's based on the size of your facility. So it's based on 1 metre distancing within your facility. So the likes of Shannon Library, for example, would have a cap on numbers because it's a much smaller facility, whereas Te Takitanga Kurahopo, for example, given the size of it, we can accommodate a lot more people through our facilities. So it's not necessarily capped at 100. Certainly when we are having an event or something like that, the settings are quite prescriptive around an event for no more than 100 with mandate passes requirements and if for 25 without.
Yes, so given that question and that response, I guess this is to you, David. If public facilities, this is a statement that's just been dropped in there, that's here. If public facilities can function well within these limitations, backed up by mask use and 1 metre physical distancing, then it may not be necessary to insist on a vaccine pass. Every situation will be different, and the risk tolerance of those running the facilities will also vary. Can I have your response to that, please?
My obligation is to staff, and under the Health and Safety at Work Act, it is to mitigate any risk. Now, we've heard today that there is risk in terms of transmissibility of COVID from unvaccinated people, and therefore that is what's guiding our recommendations around the requirement for vaccine passes in our public facilities.
Yes, Jenny. Sorry, I'm very annoying. Councillor Bishop's question to the Chief Executive has spurred another question, which is around, so based on that response, the gold standard in terms of our, if you looked at it through a pure health and safety PCBU lens about minimising risk, then the gold standard would be to administer a rapid antigen test to everybody, whether they're vaccinated or unvaccinated, entering a council facility at point of entry. Obviously, there's two issues with that, which is access to the tests at the moment, and secondly, I imagine that there is some issue in terms of actually administering the test, ensuring quality, all those kind of things. But if we had access to rats, would that change the recommendation at this point?
It wouldn't change the recommendation at this point, and just backtracking with one comment, my consideration is around not eliminating but mitigating and minimising that risk, which is what I'm being asked to look at. So through that, right at this point in time, is driving the recommendation both for our own staff and equally for the use of facilities around vaccine passes. Now, we are in a situation at the moment where we don't have ready access to the rapid antigen tests. We have sufficient supplies of them for our own staff, and that I do prioritise because clearly we don't want to prevent them from working here. So as you rightly said, that is a way of determining whether it's safe or not for them to come. Equally important is having a supply of them for our critical workers, right? Now, there may come a time, and I've already alluded to this, that when rapid antigen tests are readily available through pharmacies, we would then re-look at the policy fairly rapidly and say, is there a way that we can have members of the public who wish undertake a rapid antigen test then to come into one of our facilities? There is a whole integrity test. It can't simply be someone doing it at home who comes along. We wouldn't know whether that was their own test or someone else's test. But there may well be a situation when rapid antigen tests are readily available through pharmacies, which would allow an option for someone to go get a test, demonstrate that they are therefore clear of COVID, and therefore we would be able to reconsider the policy. But until that time, our view is that given the risk here now, the growing risk, as we know, COVID is moving in the community, the best thing we can do is to require vaccine passes of those wishing to use our facilities.
Councillor Bishop.
Final one, I promise, to the CE. The gold standard referred to by Councillor Jennings. I would imagine the gold standard for us as a nation is 100% vaccination, based on what we've heard. So this is about, as you've said, about mitigating risk. And I feel really uncomfortable having to make this decision because I'm not in a position, neither are any of us, to have the type of expertise to make this call. And that sits with the government. And that should be their call. But they've also made a call that, in their view, the risk is mitigated when we've got to a certain percentage, which we have achieved as a nation. And I'm not wanting to get out of kilter or ahead of the game as far as mandating. But given that the government has said that we as a nation have made that great effort across the country to get to that level to mitigate the risk, and I read here, it is possible that the distinction between vax and unvax may be less important as overall vaccination climbs towards 95%. This has been the experience of New South Wales. It's on our lip today. Do you think, so here's a question, do you think that we are getting ahead of ourselves or ahead of our district or ahead of the nation, given that the government haven't mandated what we're proposing here, and we have got a little bit gun-shy, a little bit scared about what's coming out from the pulpit of truth too often, and the risk has already been mitigated?
A couple of observations there. The main, well, to answer your question directly, no, I don't think we are getting ahead, because based on our current advice, that's the best thing we could do to ensure our safety. The other comment to bring out in this discussion is on the other side of this, we have staff there now who are genuinely concerned that they are going to be interacting with unvaccinated. So it's not just the proportions, the 96% or otherwise, but we do have staff there who are uncomfortable that they're interacting with unvaccinated people. So it's not an easy decision, but on balance at this time, that's why we've reached where we've got. But the comment, as I've made a couple of times, is the situation's changing rapidly. Rapid antigen tests will become available fairly, well, somewhere in the foreseeable future, and therefore we would be looking immediately as to whether we could, in fact, address the issues to enable members of the public to be in the same position as our own staff.
Chris, could you, mine's got a follow-up question. Do you mind? Thank you.
Don't you follow on to that? So what you're telling me is that within our staff and our facilities, we cannot find a mitigation which keeps that interface with the public more than 1 metre away?
Now, I'm not aware of what that mitigation is. It's also complicated that we've got some cafes and other public facilities that are sitting in where there are requirements. And Wayne, Brent, you might want to add to that, but
through you, Your Worship. Currently within our staff, when we are interacting, we do have barriers up to maintain that 1 metre distancing, etc. Within aquatic facilities, it's a bit different. Our lifeguards are interacting in general with the public. They are not required to wear a mask, and they obviously have to undertake rescues at different times where they're in close proximity of members of the public that may or may not be vaccinated. And in terms of the cafes, obviously in Te Takitango, Kurahopo and Te Horowhenua District, we have 2 cafes that operate within our facilities that are mandated that if they want to have a sit-down service, they must enforce the My Vaccine Pass. Theoretically, that means for us, for our facility, because we can't separate the airflow or create a defined space for them, we should be adhering across the whole facility for while they're operating. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. So the CE has said that his overriding consideration is the safety of staff, but on page 51, it talks about the safety of staff and our community. So I would have thought that as a PCB, you actually had to take into account visitors to your facilities that were run by you as well as your staff. So is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, and I said right at the front end of my presentation here today that as a PCBU, we have an obligation to ensure the safety to staff and all visitors to work sites and facilities. So yes,
yeah,
that is correct.
Thank you. And also just to clarify on page 49, 3.6 in the recommendation, it says that the council delegates authority to the chief executive in consultation with the mayor to make further decisions on restricting entry to all council facilities should this be considered necessary for the safety of staff and the community. And I'm just wanting to know exactly what you're thinking there, please. Why is that there?
Nothing specific other than to note that it is a fast changing and evolving situation.
Sorry, Karina. So would it be possible then, once a wave of Omicron passes and the threat to hospitals being overloaded, that sort of thing, that you and the mayor could actually rescind this, or would it need to come back to council for a full, as a full recommendation?
That, if I'm interpreting what 3.6 says, it's talking around further restrictions. What you're alluding to is actually going the other way, and certainly I'm sure no one here wants to see these restrictions any longer than they need to be. And equally, I'll come back to saying, if in fact rapid antigen tests become readily available, then that may well give some option, in the near future as well.
Councillor Browning.
Yeah, so yeah, I take it then that part of your concerns is also when you say protection of the workforce. And if you consider what Melanie said earlier, even the vaccinated people get sick, could be off work for 2 or 3 days, could be longer, depending on the family, etc. So I understand it's also about protecting the workforce in terms of having people available to man those community centres. If we don't do this mandate, and COVID does get in there and devastates our workforce, those community centres may well close. Is that one of your concerns?
We have a general concern that if in fact some of these scenarios play out and we've got a quarter to half of our workforce either with COVID or isolating because they've become a person of interest, then we do have concerns around maintaining services. What I can assure councillors is that we have this week considered what our mitigations are to maintain services, and particularly the critical services. But the reality is, if in fact some of the projections come to pass, it may well be that we cannot maintain all facilities simply because of the number of staff that are either with COVID or having to isolate at home. But sure, we've got sounding like the Prime Minister, we've got a plan, and we will do whatever we can within that to maintain services. But ensuring safety to our workers, their families, and obviously the wider community.
Just on page 57, there's a bullet point in reference to the transfer station recycling centres, and it says that officers will advise once the contract holder on vaccination certificates is known. Does that mean there's potential there for restrictions or loss of access? What is that saying? And I thought solid waste was essential.
I'm looking across to my officers here on this one. The other Brent, I think.
We're just actually waiting on their policies to come through.
Sorry, Lisa, does that include Shannon and Foxton as well, mate? I mean, yeah.
Mike? Sorry, through your worship, I'll get that answer back to you and confirm that. I assume that at this point in time it does include our transfer stations and our contracted suppliers.
Councillor Bishop.
To our council staff, one final. Well, they keep going down rabbit holes, you know, and you're loving it, seriously. Do staff currently, who, whether they're nervous about coming into contact or not, at the libraries or the pools or interface here, do they ask the customer whether they are experiencing symptoms of COVID, or are they simply just requiring whether a declaration or a passport to say they're vaccinated or unvaccinated?
Through you, Your Worship, currently I don't believe that staff are, or for community centres and pools, that staff are asking the question if they are unwell. However, there is signage at the entrance advising members of the public if they are feeling unwell that they should isolate or go and get a test. I'm not sure what's happening out here. No.
Deputy Mayor Mason.
Thank you. I just wanted to be very clear about rapid antigen testing. So what you've said, CE, is that there are some for the organisation on order, is that right?
We have some which are about to be delivered, if not they're with us, and we have another order where the indications are we will have them by early March.
So those, just to be clear, because you talked about, and I'm curious about the integrity of results and things like that, those tests would be managed by a pharmacy? No, they'll be managed in-house.
Let me clarify.
Thank you.
Yeah, what we're referring to, though, there are tests for us to administer with our own staff. What I was alluding to was, in the event that rapid antigen tests become readily available in pharmacies, then there is an option that members of the public could, in fact, go and get a test to demonstrate they haven't got COVID, which might mean that we could amend this policy to either be a vaccine pass or a valid test. The issue is the integrity of the test, so we would need a way of it being administered by a third party to give us the confidence in actual fact they are COVID free.
Oh,
Further.
yeah, two last ones. One is around finance, and it was raised earlier about through that submitter about, you know, if I'm excluded from a facility, it's actually, because we hear through long-term plans, you know, no offence, Christine, like rural community might say, well, I don't come and use the library, why should I have to pay for it? Well, it's a bit different in this, where they're choosing not to use it, but actually we're effectively choosing or voting that they're excluded. So that whole paying for something you're not allowed to use. I asked the question, and thank you, Jacinta, for the answer, which is I printed out here. And did everyone see that? I don't need to read it then. But you know, the question was, I should read it for the public. The libraries, community centres and aquatics are funded by targeted rates. So ratepayers, you can effectively see what it is you pay towards these specifically. And if a ratepayer was excluded from using one or all of these, you know, would we apply penalties, like if they chose not to pay for it? And if so, how much? And the answer was 10%. And what sort of figure would council be looking at if say that, because in order to have the My Vaccine Passport, a valid one, you have to get the boosters, and there's a little bit of a shortfall there. So while we might have got to 96%, let's just say it dropped to 90 or something, and 10% of ratepayers decided they weren't going to pay. How's that going to affect? What would that amount to? It came to like 530,000 shortfall, but then a penalty of 53,000, and it was different again for pools because it was just libraries. I'm fast anyway. The question I want to follow up with: could penalties be challenged by the ratepayer? Let's say they wrote in a letter and said why they didn't do it, blah blah, and then it was delayed, and then went through a process, but then later written off, because that has been the case here where we've written off unpaid rates after several years, and then you never get that back. I don't want to say who that was and the amount, but it was pretty huge. Unpaid rates or penalties, whatever, and we just write it off after a certain period. So could that be the case here? We never get that back.
Through your worship, I guess in terms of the advice from central government, the advice from local government, in terms of this council's funding policy, the decision was made that the choice is to fund a portion of it through fees and user charges, and then the rest through rates, which we set a funding policy at the start of the year, and effectively, regardless of whether you use the services, you are required to pay that targeted rate. In terms of your question around penalties and the ability of this council in the future to make a decision about potentially writing off certain penalties for different reasons than we currently have in our policy, then there is an avenue for this council to make a decision in the future for following years around some form of remission if it chose to, for penalty remissions. But given what's happening with COVID, we have tried to do everything we can in terms of setting up payment arrangements and doing different things for people that may be struggling. But there isn't currently the facility, but if this council chose to want to remit some form of penalties in the future for these reasons, then it would have that avenue.
Seems to have exhausted questions, does it? Okay, so let's then move to the recommendations, which is 3.3, 3.4, 3.5 and 3.6. The Council approves to require from 21st of February 2022 to align with the staff consultation for a valid My Vaccine Pass to be introduced by the public for entry to the Council Civic Building at 126 Oxford Street, Levin, Te Takuritanga Okura Hapo, Te Horowhenua District Channel Library, 11 Aquatic Centre Foxton Pool and Shannon School Pool for the duration it is managed by Aquatics Horowhenua. 3.4, that the Council adopts its policy for all in-person participation at formal Council meetings and committee meetings, hearings and official Council workshops as set out in this report to apply from 21st of February 2022 at all Council venues. 3.5, that the Council notes the process the Chief Executive is taking in regard to establishing a policy for COVID-19 vaccinations of staff. And 3.6, that the Council delegates authority to the Chief Executive in consultation with the Mayor to make further decisions on restricting entry to all Council facilities should this be considered necessary for the safety of staff and the community. Councillor Brannigan's moving, so I have a seconder. Councillor Mitchell. Right, so open for debate or discussion. Councillor Brannigan.
Anybody kick it off? Your Worship, this to me is a very straightforward matter. Although I do consider that it will impact some people. People have a choice in this global pandemic that we've faced in this country, that we've faced the last 2 years. And a lot of people have made huge sacrifices, losses of businesses, losses of jobs, and many other things. and you can see that that's starting to impact now in terms of inflation and pressures in the workforce and certainly in society. But for us as governors of this district and of these facilities, we have a clear responsibility in my view. The Chief Executive has outlined it in his responsibility as a PCBU to his staff and the community. We have another responsibility under the CM Act, Civil Defence Emergency Management Act 2002, in terms of our responsibility now to lead in response to a natural hazard event in this community and in this country. We're a part, Civil Defence is a partner agency to health throughout this pandemic, and for us to make any other decision, in my view, than to support this mandate policy for our community facilities would be counter to those responsibilities and obligations. If we look at the evidence in front of us today from Melanie and evidence on health and websites and whatever you read in terms of health in New Zealand, it's clear the effects of the benefits of vaccinations. As the Chief Executive has outlined, there's a responsibility to a staff, and if you think about the staff that work in these community centres for 40 hours a week at least, and the few people that come into those community centres currently, some will be unvaccinated, no doubt. They spend a lot of time in community centres. You don't go to a library, generally go to a library for 5 minutes unless you're paying a bill or something. Generally, a lot of people spend a lot of time in those libraries, at the computers, reading books, taking part in activities in those libraries. So it's a hell of a lot different than a lot of other areas. The ability for that, for staff to be affected by COVID and then, again, be off work and sick, even if you are vaccinated, and there is the possibility for that to be impact on that staff, on those staff, and also to limit the amount of staff we have, and potentially even, as I alluded to before, close those facilities for the lack of people to work within them, and then the whole community wouldn't miss out. Your Worship, people in this country through this pandemic have had a choice. 95% of people have spoken, and they have made the choice to become vaccinated for their and their family's health, and probably that, a lot of them for the greater good of our society. A small amount of people have chosen not to, and that's their choice, absolutely their choice. But it's been outlined, if that is your choice, there could be a price to pay in terms of restrictions on some of your freedoms and some of your abilities to attract services. So while I sympathise with some of those people who have that view, it still remains 95% of New Zealanders have spoken and have chosen to be vaccinated, and the benefits of that's been outlined to us today. So in my view, the decision is easy for me, and hopefully other councillors support it. Our job is to protect, to prevent, and mitigate the effects of this virus that is climbing through New Zealand currently, and who knows what the next variation will bring, to protect our staff and certainly our community and our facilities. The one bonus, as the Chief Executive has alluded, is the rapid antigen testing. It's not here yet in the public domain, but it will get there. Hopefully sooner than rather later, and we can then potentially revisit this decision if we choose to mandate. And I'm happy to hold the right of reply. Thank you.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Councillor Brannigan. I agree with everything that you say. I think that this is a short-term measure to basically, we have now a very transmissible version of COVID, and we are trying to protect the people that don't yet have it, and to try and stop large numbers getting it all at once, which is going to have big ramifications for our health system and looking after those people. And also impacts on people who have other sicknesses and illnesses and accidents that actually need to be treated. So in the short term, I think we need to make sure that there is less risk of contracting COVID in the facilities that we control. Melanie clearly showed that people who are unvaccinated carry a much bigger viral load they are far more infectious than those people who are vaccinated. I would like to think that when my 4-year-old granddaughter went to the pool for her swimming lessons, that she was at less risk of getting COVID than if she, you know, if I knew there were people in there who are unvaccinated, her rights to go swimming would actually be trodden upon. She wouldn't be able to go to places. So for now, I think we need to look after the most vulnerable, which are those people that cannot be vaccinated, not who choose not to be. And it's our responsibility to do so. So I would support these recommendations at the moment, and I'm hoping that in a matter of months that we'll be able to reverse it, as the majority of New Zealand has either experienced the Omicron or been vaccinated, and therefore it's not such the risk that it is now.
Deputy Mayor Mason.
This is a difficult conversation before us, but it's along the lines of what we all signed up for, making decisions on behalf of our communities. And for me today, it is simply a decision about how we conduct business, or what direction we give to the Chief Executive about the business that's conducted, and about managing risk and the health and safety of people who enter the places that we operate. And yes, I absolutely agree, people do have a choice about vaccine, but there are some people who can't, for whatever reason, or for their own reasons, choose not to. But on the balance of what we've heard today from Melanie, and I agree with Councillor Mitchell that this is essentially about protecting a cohort of our community who could become incredibly unwell, and where the virus could be spread much quicker than if we didn't implement this recommendation. I do want to add, though, that I would like to see a 3.7, that we do charge the CE with investigating rapid antigen testing that becomes available, and maybe that is at council cost for people to enter, or that we do investigate rapid antigen testing for beyond our staff, because there's a really small number of people who will be affected, but there are people I know who are unable to be vaccinated, who do use our facilities, who will be affected by this. And while it might be short term, I think we need to give some thought to how we can explore rapid antigen testing, not just for our staff, but also for our community, or ensure that we look to that being available in our community. I do think we need to give some security to our community. We've got a higher percentage of elderly in our community, we know that, and we need to give them some sense of comfort that we have considered broadly the well-being of our district. So somewhat reluctantly, and I respect that people do make choices about being vaccinated or unvaccinated, but I do think this is fundamentally an important decision about how we conduct our business and how risk is managed in our business, so I will be supporting it.
Councillor Casey.
Yeah, and I just want to add and acknowledge it's just isn't a tough decision for us, but all our social services out there that have really been struggling in this district, and you know, that they're not happy about having to do the whole passport and scan in and mask scenario, and it does go against, especially a lot of our essential services, they're not happy about it, but at the end of the day, they're hoping, such as what Councillor Mitchell said, that it is going to be short term. They really are hoping that. They had to get permission from the Ministry of Health, a couple of them, to have a complete exemption, which they've done, and those three are pretty much age concerned. They were able to get that successfully. The Prisoners' Aid and Rehabilitation were able to get that, and the support services, they were, based on what they do within the community across the board, they were able to receive those. But the rest of them, of course, either didn't apply or haven't had that luxury. So I am in support of what we're about to do today.
Councillor James. Can I just start with a point of clarification? Deputy Mayor Mason talked about a 3.7. Did you want a seconder for that now? And is that because at the moment these have been taken as a block rather than individually? So just wanted to get clarification. Are you adding that as part of the block or is it separate? Okay. So the chair of the meeting can introduce a new recommendation. Other than that, the options would be to seek an amendment to one of the existing recommendations. So if you could word an amendment around that, you could, or
Councillor Owens, have you got some advice?
Well, just a personal point of view is there's currently those recommendations. I don't believe there's any reason whatsoever when those are dealt to that Deputy Mayor Mason can subsequently move the recommendation she wants to make.
Yes. So, James.
Well, this really is a tricky issue, isn't it? Look, I'm pro-vaccination. I think everyone should be vaccinated. I think it's a sensible thing to do. But I acknowledge that there are people that have made that decision not to. What I'm not so keen on is, I guess, the way in which society is becoming more separate and divided. One of the things I thought about is in response to this agenda item was ways in which we could find a sweet spot or a compromise. So I put out on Facebook a question around some different ideas and had pretty good engagement. It was a bit of a straw poll. And there does seem to be an appetite for, or I guess acceptance among some for an option whereby there could be time slots where vaccine passports are enforced, with the sort of the default position being that there's a more open setting for larger periods of time. But I've heard and I've listened obviously today around the objective of this in terms of health and safety and those drivers. And I understand that that's probably unworkable as an option given that. But then I read the material that we've got from Dr. Patrick O'Connor, and it sort of causes me to pause and reflect again. And I'm going to read out, I think, just again the key paragraphs here because I think it's really important. Is that he says, once we see more cases, the actual risk in any situation will increase. Nonetheless, as numbers increase, there is an argument that distinguishing between vaccinated and unvaccinated will become irrelevant. At this point, we will be dampening down the number of infections, not trying to eliminate them, and factors such as limited gathering size, use of masks, and staying home when sick will be more productive than supervising vaccine requirements. Further, it is possible that the distinction between vaccinated and unvaccinated may be less important as the overall vaccination rate climbs towards 95%, and I think we're already pretty much at that rate. This has been the experience in New South Wales. And then finally, I think Councillor Bishop referenced it, if public facilities can function well within these limitations around size limits, backed up by mask use and 1 metre physical distancing, then it may not be necessary to insist on a vaccine pass. Every situation will be different, and the risk tolerance of those running the facilities will also vary. So, this is one of these really tricky issues where you also have to look at the whole My Vaccine Pass framework. And what does it actually do, and how does it work, and what does it actually achieve? And I mean, I have some questions about the integrity of that system, but I'm really troubled by what this will mean for pockets of our community in terms of accessing facilities. And so I'm very much attracted to the option that Deputy Mayor Mason referenced, which is around the rats. And so, look, I'm unclear where. I'm keen to listen to the rest of the debate, but I'm having some real difficulty with taking a blanket approach as is proposed by the recommendation.
Councillor, thank you. Firstly, I won't be supporting this motion on the basis of 3.6. I would support 3.6 if it was in line with government mandated direction. And then I guess...
What's 3.6 again?
Oh, Victoria. Anyone else want to interrupt? Throwing shoes? When the shoes come over, I'll be worried about. Look, it appears that when all sensible argument or testing of a view comes to an end, the health and safety card is played, the joker in the pack. And I want to start by saying this is not our decision. This is not our decision. Who are we to say what is right for our nation? Because we are no different to any other community around the country that has community facilities. It's not our call. We are not up to making this call. And if it was so dangerous and so infectious and going to affect so many people, do you not think the government would have made that call by now? They've shut down the country numerous times. They change alert levels when they feel that it's the right time. What qualification do we possess at a table here to make that call? None. I am not going to put in a box a section of our community and say, you're not as good as us. I have had an experience in my own operation of a village where I have seen the fallout of decisions like this being made, and it is horrible. And I am not going to say to any one of our residents out there or any one of our community here, you're not as good as us, you don't deserve what we've got, because that's what we're doing. In our own business world, if we're going to play the health and safety card, do we say to our own staff who have an interface with the public, we're not going to accept unvaccinated into our shop, into our salon, into our workshop? Have we done that? You know, and how do we police that? It is really hard to make those calls where people's lives are affected. They feel aggrieved because they're in a position, a lot of them, whether you like it or not, just will not get vaccinated because they've got their own reasons, and I'm not going to get into their lives and tell them why they should or shouldn't. And if that was the case at the start, the vaccine would have been mandatory. There has been gap left for those people of our society to operate, and there are ways that they can operate fully in our society if we choose to put some effort in. Whether we enforce, as it says by the doctor, the separation. If we opt to have periods where, and I don't like using unvaxxed because it's like the apartheid, where open sessions are offered in public facilities where people who may not feel comfortable with the potential interaction of our society I've made fully aware that that's probably a time where it's best for them to stay away. Now, we have heard this afternoon that the most vulnerable people of our society are those who have made that choose to become that by not having the vaccination. Surely they understand the decision they've made. Surely they understand that if they're feeling unwell, or if they're getting too close to people, they'll
make that responsible decision. We're not protecting the vaccinated here by doing this. We have heard countless times that Omicron is going to sweep through our nation. Horowhenua District Council restricting access to some of their public facilities is not going to have one jot of difference on that needle. And if you think it is, I'm sorry, I think you're delusional. It's going to come through society because we don't control every public gathering. You know, the whole country's population files through supermarkets on a weekly basis. If we can't offer a similar type of arrangement that they do, we are way out of line with what is perceived to be right now and right through every outbreak acceptable mitigation to the risk that's presented. So I will not be supporting, won't come as any surprise what I've said, but I just don't want to have those people of our community who, for reasons that are their own, made to feel like they aren't part of us.
Is it my turn there, Bernie?
Certainly can be. Robert, there you go.
Hey. Okay. I'm not going to support the recommendation. You know, I think about a common verse that says a city divided against itself. Even a household divided against itself will not stand. So I'm looking forward towards us being able to manage this. And I hear, you know, what we're saying as responsible employers. I hear that, but I'm not going to make a decision on behalf of my community because I don't have that sort of expertise in my brain to be able to make that sort of a call. So I'm not going to be supporting it.
Thanks, Robert. Anyone wish further?
I'll be pretty brief because the issues which are front of mind for me have been canvassed well by others. I identify that I support the resolution. We need to own this. I get what Councillor Bishop is saying. Maybe we shouldn't have to own this for the reasons he's given. The reality is we have to own this. It is our decision. We can't back away from it. We have to acknowledge the reality of Omicron. We have to accept the science. We have to protect our communities and our staff, especially those who are most vulnerable. And to me, this resolution is the only way forward.
Thank you. So, no, I think we've still got Councillor Tukapua to go.
Okay. I just want to take it easy, you know. So yeah, I appreciate everyone's views, and that's what this is. This is the nature of what we do, and while I agree with Councillor Bishop around the government should just call it, but okay, it's our decision, and I will take a vote. I won't be supporting the motions, or certainly not in block. And for the record and for public viewing, look, apologies, David, but you might not be familiar, but I just like to say how it is sometimes, so if I cause offence, I apologise in advance. This was authored by Lisa Slade and approved by our new interim CE, David Wright, who's helping us out, but of course not from the Horowhenua. I, for clarity, want to tell the public, because it might come as a surprise to you, but elected members are not mandated to be vaccinated, though the majority are, just like the national percentage. And local government New Zealand sought legal advice for our sector, and the advice basically was that elected members are not employed. We don't have a job description, we don't have set hours of work, and so it's a little bit tricky to, well, it's not straightforward to enforce us to be mandated like you would with staff. So I am not vaccinated for reasons of my own, and that's not a surprise because we've been in this COVID space for 2 years now. I've always been present. Our mayor emailed us and asked us the question, and I replied no. So I didn't hide it, and I just want to thank my fellow councillors for not treating me different, for not, trying to stay away from me or not engage or anything like that. Everyone's just treated me the same, and I appreciate that. And we're now at this point where we're running into the 3rd year, and Omicron's apparently, well, it is at the door. Not at the rates that were modelled, but there you go. We've heard some of the science, and much of that I agree with, but there were some questions she couldn't answer. And then, of course, Councillor Sam Jennings read out a couple of paragraphs from Mid-Central's representative, which really, it's a little bit conflicting. And when we talk about, or it was mentioned, people have had a choice. People have had a choice. Well, what is the choice when you either take it or you lose your job? And sorry about it if you've got 3 or 4 kids to feed. So it's kind of a force into it. And even, I know people that have had some pretty serious reactions or adverse events, but they know they've got to feed the family, so they'll go and get the 2nd dose. And then they're praying, oh my gosh, I'll be due for a booster about May, June. Oh, I don't think I'm going to get it. But I've just had a real bad time, and I'm not getting any help. Medical professionals, which is why I asked about treatment protocol, but there's none. Did you hear that? There's none. So we all know that for different reasons people don't want to get the full double dose or the booster because but using this My Vaccine Pass as putting that in force for our facilities means those that want access to those everyday services that have to go and get it, otherwise they can't, yet they pay for it. If I so get the chance, I was going to, because this is not about me, I wanted to possibly, because this is likely going to go through, which is why I asked at the beginning, could I say something at the end to the public, and that's when I was going to say my own little bit, if I'm allowed. But even Christine, you mentioned your granddaughter, and I get that, but actually under 12s who are unvaccinated will still be swimming around in there with her, because they're still allowed and they don't have to produce the pass. And those kids come from households all around the community, so I'm not quite sure. It's really tricky, isn't it? How you work that one out. But I strongly believe we're about to pass a double standard. I get it. So, by all means, Councillor Mason, if you get that's 3.73, that'll be great. But yeah, to provide that for staff and not for the public to access something they pay for. But yeah, and yeah, I'll be all good because I don't want to be a hypocrite. I'm not going to ask for different or just whatever happens to everyone happens to me, and that's how it is. So yeah, there's nothing much more to say.
Thank you. Can I just conclude this part of the agenda by saying that I appreciate the fact that everybody has considered this topic extremely well. All arguments for and against are obviously well meant, and I appreciate the fact that Council have considered this topic extremely thoroughly, and we have debated now for a considerable amount of time the issue. It's not been a foregone conclusion. I think there's been many well-made points on either side. For me, I will be supporting the motion. The vaccinations or the vaccine has clearly demonstrated that it does have an impact on people's ability to either get sick or transfer this virus. As a member of the older cohort, I do not want to get this, and I know that I am at risk in the business life that I have, and I can't determine people coming into my business whether they are vaccinated or not. But the more people that are vaccinated, the less risk that I have in terms of that happening. So I'm looking at the prospect of possibly having to close my business for a considerable amount of time if one of my staff is a close contact or does get the virus themselves. So that's why I support this recommendation at this stage, and I do think it's a fast-moving issue. I do believe that we'll be revisiting this probably in a fairly short space of time, because it's like going down a river in a raft. The rapids are just around the corner, and then it's hopefully a bit more smooth sailing. So I hope that is what occurs in this space. But if we want to minimise the risk, if we want to return to normal as soon as possible, then we have to make sure that people do understand that vaccination is, at the moment, the only path to be able to do that. And whether rapid antigen testing makes a difference in the future, we'll have to wait and see. So I'll now, Councillor Brannigan, do you wish to override a reply?
I only read the canvas that in our region there's 8 councils, including the regional council. Just for interest in those that may be watching or listening. If this goes through, we will be the 7th council that adopts this policy. So we're swimming with the tide, not against it. And the other council that hasn't yet are certainly heading down this track. So again, we're not swimming against the tide by adopting this. It's consistent through our region, and certainly our capital neighbours in Wellington are similar. And I appreciate all the views. For me, it was an easy conversation and decision. I accept others don't hold that view, but I think it was great to hear the debate and certainly the views. And there was some very good points made that I actually agree with, even with others who may not be voting for this resolution.
So we'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? We have 1, 2, 3 against. So the motion is carried. Sorry, Robert. Sorry, I can't see your hand, Robert. Are you voting against? Sorry. He did put his hand up. Can you hear me, Robert?
He's against.
He's against. Okay, so the motion is carried 7-4. Thank you. Deputy Mayor Mason, did you have
Thank you. I did want to introduce an additional recommendation, and that is that the CE potentially brings back to the table, it may be by way of a report, the options available with rapid antigen testing, particularly because it's been voiced around this table that we don't want to be a them and us organisation. We do have to act with some responsibility, but there are people who will not be able to attend our facilities, and I don't want to be part of a group that does allow for exclusion, and we have employed staff based on their school, not on their vaccine decision, and we are going to be providing rapid antigen testing for them. And I think there's a really small group of our community that are in this position that might choose to use our facilities. So I would like to see us explore how we can be inclusive as opposed to exclusive, and set that opportunity up for people. I mean, I've travelled on the ferries recently and I have no idea who was vaccinated, who was unvaccinated, but what I know is that the providers of that public service, or that service, transport service, checked either for vaccine passes or rapid antigen tests. So I don't know, not rapid antigen tests, but PCRs or whatever they're called. And so that, that security, if you like, had been given. So I wonder if I would like to move that the Chief Executive explores the options for rapid antigen testing for people wishing to use our facilities where we have introduced the vaccine pass, if there's a seconder.
Oh, yes, I'll do that. There's Bernie.
Yes, Robert. Can you see that recommendation there, Robert?
Can you use your microphone?
Sorry, can you see that recommendation that Deputy Mayor Mason is putting?
Could you read it out for me, please?
The Chief Executive reports to Council on the options for use of rapid antigen tests for people who wish to use our facilities without a vaccine pass.
You need a seconder?
I do, yes.
I'll do it. I'll
sorry. You're right. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Councillor Tukapua.
I just have a question, and I wonder if maybe Ross could be the best person to answer. And there are two other, or that I know of, types of tests. But could you explain the difference and why this one's perhaps the better one?
Yeah, as far as I know, Councillor Tukapua, there's the PCR test, which is the main one, and the rapid antigen test. There's different variations of that, and I understand they're not in New Zealand yet, but there is saliva tests as well that are in the world, around the globe somewhere. The rapid antigen tests come from different companies, and they are different. The one we're using is from a company called Roaches, and that's a similar test that the other councils around the country are getting for their staff. So,
is it the best one or the one that's available?
Oh, I think it's seen as a very good one. Yes, yeah, very very accurate. Yeah, and there's the data that comes with them that shows how accurate they are.
Deputy Mayor Mason, are you comfortable with that motion? So, any further discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Jennings.
Mr. Mayor, I was going to look to move another resolution, but I think it might just be able to deal with it if I can just ask the Chief Executive a question, which is whether, now that decision's been made, is it possible to get some whether it's a email report back or a report back on how we might provide services, such as library services or other services that can be accessed at certain facilities, online or through remote settings. I think that given that we've made that decision, we need to look at how many services can be provided in that way. Are you happy to just sort of agree to do that without that being captured as a formal resolution?
Absolutely, and we're already giving thought to that one. There's a couple of things that come into that consideration. Yes, there are a number of things we can do contactless. The issue is going to be the number of our staff that might be available at any time. So, yes, we've already had discussions around what options can we provide to enable a service to be delivered under these settings.
Councillor Tupapua, do you want the last word? Yeah, you do or don't? Oh, okay.
So just really quickly, I just want to, because I'm from here, I'll be going to Zoom, just to reassure the public that I'll try my best to do a very good job offline. You saw tonight that Robert's able to keep up. I will too, and it's just really my fellow councillors whether they can handle my questions through the screen. Please bear with me. But yeah, as you know, we've got the landfill hearings coming up when this takes effect next week. So that's going to be my first really test of how well or how effective I can be. But I will say, when we get presentations online as opposed to people up here, there is a difference. I personally feel that when the person's in the room, it's a lot more, it's better received. So that I worry a little bit about that, but anyway, I'm going to try, and possibly there will be a story about my being unvaccinated released through the media, but I can handle it, and I apologise for people that have voted for me that perhaps were disappointed now that, but honestly, for my own medical reasons, family history, and even my current status, the risks are too high for me, and that's really why I've chosen not to be vaccinated. So thank you, and all the best. Hope this doesn't take too long, but the term and we get these things going, but it's out of my control.
Challenge for me will be in the number of questions that you have every time, and trying to make sure that you get the ability to ask them will be thing. Just leave the final word to the acting chief executive.
You alluded to it in the end. I can give you my assurance that if an option emerges between now and the next council meeting, then I will not feel we need to wait to the next council meeting. So, it is a rapidly changing space. We could find in 2 to 3 weeks that rapid antigen tests are readily available in pharmacies, in which case we could move rapidly and bring a report back to you. So it gives us no pleasure either to have to be recommending this mandate.
Mm-hmm.
I will, Councillor Tupapua, though, ask you to have the final word and close the meeting.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou, kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ariki a I hukraiti. Me te aroha o te atua.
Te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga.
Me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu.
Te wairua tapu, ake ake. Amen.
Thank you all. Thank you for your staff and everyone that are present, and for those watching online. Appreciate your engagement. Have a good night.
Kia ora.